Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einer Sonderfolge von Doppelbrett, wie immer mit Christoph
und Sandra. Hallo Sandra.
Hallo Christoph. Tja, da treffen wir uns heute mal ganz außerplanmäßig.
Verrückte Sachen gibt's.
Ja, weil uns nämlich so kurz vor der Zielgeraden zur letzten Folge eine Idee gekommen ist.
Genau, wir haben entschieden, dass wir noch ein kleines Interview machen wollen mit dem Autor von Flamme Rouge, mit Asgar Harding Granerud, und haben ihn deshalb noch angefragt, und es hat leider nicht mehr ganz geklappt, das noch direkt in die Folge einzubauen, und deshalb machen wir das jetzt.
Ja, weil wir dachten, das bietet sich natürlich an, ein dänischer Autor, eine Tour de France, die in Dänemark gestartet ist in Kopenhagen und die am Schluss einen dänischen Gesamtsieger in Paris auf dem Podium hatte, uns mit Asgar Harding Granerud über das Spiel, über das Radfahren, über die Tour de France zu unterhalten. Das hat Christoph gemacht und ihr könnt euch jetzt anhören, was Asgar Harding Granerud zu sagen hatte. Viel Spaß!
Welcome, Asgar. Nice to have you here. I'm really happy. We want to talk a little about Flamme Rouge especially, and maybe also a little about cycling in general. Well, with Flamme Rouge, you made a board game about cycling as topic. What does cycling mean to you? Why did you do a game about cycling?
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. The reason I did a game about cycling is that that's the idea that came to me with the mechanical inspiration I had at the time. Of course, it's worth mentioning that throughout my childhood in the summer holidays, my dad was always watching Tour de France. In Danish, we have a saying that says the sound of the tour, which is like in July where you have the background sound going on while you're maybe playing in the garden as a child or sometimes watching, etc. But it was always on for like almost the entire 3 weeks that the tour runs when I was a child, just in the background.
So this year's Tour de France started in Denmark.
Yes.
And also we had a Danish winner in the end in Jonas Vingegaard.
Yes.
Was this a special Tour de France for you, or didn't you follow it in the end?
I followed very little. I was lucky that the first stage I really sat down and saw. Of course, I saw the start here in Copenhagen where I live. I went there and saw it physically. And the day after on stage 2, I was at my brother's place who lives outside Roskilde. So I went there and saw that and saw the rest of the stage on TV because it was fun. I missed day 3, but then accidentally I turned on I think on the 14th stage, like 20 minutes before everything exploded. So I was very lucky to like watch the big moment that ended up defining the tour. Of course, there were 7 stages left and things still happened, but I didn't follow it closely. I'm happy for him, and I'm happy that everyone else is so happy as well, but I'm not personally big into idolizing sports people. I'm happy for them, but I don't feel like I won because he accidentally came from the same country that I was born in.
You already told us that cycling was a theme that came to the mechanics and not the mechanics to the theme. So when was this? Maybe you can tell us a little more about how the designing process went.
Sure, I can. It happened in 2012 where I had the idea for the game, and I can almost remember the exact spot, and it was like less than a 10-20 minute thinking process, and it felt alive in my head already then. Of course, there were still a lot of things to test and of the small stuff to decide on, but I don't know if it gets too technical if I start explaining something from the card game Dominion, or if that's okay.
That's okay.
Okay, so the card game Dominion is a deck building game, and everyone hailed it as something completely new when it came out, and it's a fantastic game in its own right. But of course, I had been doing deck building more than a decade before that, playing Magic the Gathering. So a lot of us had been doing deck building, but what Dominion did was take this element from Magic the Gathering, where it's a meta element that you do before the game, and then focus the entire game around that concept. So it took one element of a much bigger game and made a game around that. And I thought, why can't I do that? Take one element of a game and make an entire game around that. And the thing I enjoyed the most when I played Dominion was the Chapel card, which is the basic card in the start set, which allows you to thin your deck, to instead of just build it bigger and bigger with better and better cards, to also remove cards to make a more efficient engine. I loved that idea. And that's basically trying to make a game based on that one element from Dominion and make it into an entire game of its own, is where the inspiration to Flamme Rouge came from. That's the core idea. And deck thinning, removing cards, is the only thing you do every turn in Flamme Rouge, right? It's the one thing every rider, every player does every turn, removing a card from the deck, which means that you're left with a more or less efficient engine because the rest are being carried over. So that's the core concept, which is really all the game is about.
So in the end, well, also through this mechanism, Flamme Rouge feels quite thematic to me and also to many other people, I think. Was it like you also tried to make the game very thematic, or was it just happening?
So that would actually be going back to the mechanical inspiration, because I wanted something where I wanted to thin a deck. So I started thinking about what's the mechanical thematic representation of thinning a deck. And the first thing that popped into my mind, and I still think it makes perfect sense today, is that because you have to use something that you get less and less of. That's what you do when you thin a deck. So you're using energy. You start with a lot of energy, you get less and less, and the trick then becomes about managing the efficiency of that energy over time. All of the things I have just said fit perfectly to the theme of cycling, right? It's about managing your energy throughout a race. And of course, I then added the small rules that are needed to make it both thematic but also interesting as a game. If it was just playing your cards, then it wouldn't be a game. But since you want to be at the front at the end, but you don't want to be at the front earlier, or at least not too early, and you can get or lose a move from slipstream or from blocking or from mountains, all these small things then add up to become part of you managing your energy throughout the whole race, accounting for terrain, accounting for the other riders, and accounting for the tactics. But it's still that core mechanical, very simple inspiration of using energy that inspired it.
So the small mechanics came to the game when you already thought about making a cycling game, or was it before that?
So the process was Dominion, Magic the Gathering, deck thinning, what fits, cycling fits. Since cycling fits and I have this race where I need to hit a point at an end, then if I make the race too short, it becomes about only playing your highest card. If I make the race too long, it doesn't matter what you play, because then at the end, everyone will only be moving very slow. So I figured that all it really needed was to find the right length of race. And with that right length of race, it would mean that these small bonuses that I wanted to add in to make this slightly interesting would end up finding a point where it would be relevant decisions you made along the way, which ended up deciding the winner. And it just, since it makes sense to, once you have thought about spending energy in a deck thinning context, it makes sense to talk about wind resistance and talk about slipstream. So both the bad part of it and the good part of the wind, which is basically all the two rules are. And of course, the exhaustion cards are basically the witch cards from Dominion, right? It's a bad card being added to your deck that over time can end up causing you trouble. So it's still part of the ordinary deck building genre, or deck thinning in this case genre.
Flamme Rouge is not set today. It's set in the 1930s, more or less. Was that a decision you made, or was it made with the publisher?
Of course, all decisions when you have a game published is always made, not all of them, but if I make a decision or come with a suggestion, it still has to be approved by the publisher. So it's something we do together. But it was my idea and they liked it from the beginning. So I knew that any sport is always controversial in a given time. Not only do people have big fan identities tied up with specifics of it, but there are also current scandals. And if you move it far enough back to a time of nostalgia where the men had big mustaches and etc., and they, instead of doing EPO, they were drinking cognac and probably doing coke as well. And all different substance abuse. But we don't think about it because it's too far back and it becomes the romantic period. So I wanted to distance it from today and have people have happy associations with it. And I think that's that succeeded. I know we're not talking about Heat, which is our new car racing game from Days of Wonder, but it's also being placed in the 1960s, not only because of nostalgia, also because it's easier to imagine that a car could be anything, whereas today it's been decided what is the best car. And of course, they're doing innovations, but it's in the very small adjustments compared to back then. It's more full of fantasy in that era.
So there already are 2 expansions for Flamme Rouge. Now I saw on BGG there's the Grand Tour expansion announced for 2022. What can we expect from this expansion?
Okay, so the first thing you can expect is that it's not going to be out in 2022.
Okay.
So I suggest that anyone who is really interested in make sure that the publisher Lauterpelit knows on all their platforms. Of course, it is being worked on, and as you can see on BGG, there's already a cover and stuff like that. So it will come, but it's not moving fast for a number of reasons. That's primarily up to them. The core, of course, a lot of things have changed, but the core of the Grand Tour expansion, tracking time, etc., I put online for free on BGG as a play-it-yourself module, make your own campaigns within a few months of it releasing in 2016. So you can go and play a lot of it without waiting for this expansion and playing these Grand Tour games. There is also a fan-developed app that helps you track time, etc., if you want to do that. It is my favorite way to play the game, playing these linked games where the previous results matter, not only in the points you gathered for how well you did, but also in the exhaustion that you take with you for the next game. So you start a little more tired depending on how well you did.
Well, then we come to the last question. You already mentioned there's one game coming out. Are there any other games planned, or what can we expect in the future from you?
Yes, there are several other games under contract to be published in the future, but nothing announced as of yet. We also have some of our titles coming from our own publisher, Sidekick Games, we made 6 Hans Christian Andersen themed games that are just out this summer. And apart from that, there are more things coming from our own publisher in the future and more from other publishers. We keep designing games all the time. And maybe even more Flamme Rouge stuff eventually. And if the Heat games from Racing Game from Days of Wonder does well, of course, we would love to make new tracks and potential extra expansions, etc. for it.
Sounds great. We're looking forward to it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Ja, dann jetzt auch auf Deutsch nochmal vielen Dank an Asgar Harding Granerud für das Interview, das er uns gegeben hat. Wir hoffen, ihr hattet Spaß beim Hören. Wir stehen schon wieder in den Startlöchern für die nächste Folge. Wir sprechen über Jekyll vs. Hyde. Die Folge kommt dann wie immer am 1. Freitag im kommenden Monat und wir freuen uns, wenn ihr wieder reinhört. Viel Spaß. Ciao.
Tschüss.